Welcome to Life Stories, where real experiences shape the world around us. Today, we bring you a powerful tale of grief, justice, and transformation. Dr. Emma Carter, a skilled heart surgeon, finds herself thrust into an unimaginable situation when she's called to save a young girl's life. But a tragic encounter with two police officers sets off a chain of events that will forever alter the lives of everyone involved. This is a story of love, loss, and the fight for accountability. Join us as we share this deeply emotional journey. Subscribe to the channel to start today's story with us. Dr. Emma Carter leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples as the clock on the wall ticked past 9 p.m. It had been another long day at her private practice in Hartford. She was exhausted, her mind fogged with thoughts of the patients she had treated and the administrative work that still awaited her the next day. The buzzing of her phone on the desk startled her. For a moment, she considered letting it go to voicemail. The day had taken its toll, and all she wanted was to crawl into bed. But something compelled her to reach for the phone. "Dr. Carter," she answered, her voice steady despite her weariness. The voice on the other end was male, deep, and filled with urgency. "This is Sheriff Michael Lawson from Springfield. My daughter Emily has had a severe heart attack. The doctors here say they can't operate. They told me you're the only surgeon who can save her. Please. I'm begging you." Emma sat upright, her exhaustion vanishing in an instant. The desperation in his voice was palpable. She imagined this man a sheriff, someone used to control and authority reduced to pleading. It underscored the gravity of the situation. "Sheriff Lawson," she replied, keeping her tone calm despite the urgency. "I need more details. What has the hospital done so far?" "They've stabilized her. But she has a congenital heart defect, a septal defect. They called it. The lead doctor says she won't survive without surgery." His voice broke. "If you don't come, she'll die." Emma's heart clenched at the weight of his words. "I'll leave immediately," she assured him. "Send me all her medical records and the hospital's address." Within minutes, Emma had packed her surgical tools and loaded them into her SUV. Flying wasn't an option. Springfield was a remote town with no late-night flights or emergency transport services. The 4-hour drive was her only choice. And every second mattered. As she sped down the highway, Emma's thoughts raced faster than her car. The medical records Sheriff Lawson had sent flashed through her mind. Emily's condition, a septal defect disrupting the normal flow of blood between her heart's chambers, was severe. Left untreated, it caused dangerous arrhythmias and irreversible damage. At only 16 years old, Emily's life was precariously balanced on the edge of a knife. Emma couldn't shake the sheriff's voice from her mind. It wasn't just the voice of a lawman, it was the voice of a father. Desperate and helpless in the face of losing his child. Her own father's face surfaced in her memory, a comforting presence during her most challenging times. She thought of how he used to tell her that saving lives was more than a job, it was a calling. Tonight, that calling felt heavier than ever. The digital clock on her dashboard read 2:05 a.m. when the faint glow of Springfield streetlights appeared in the distance. Relief swept through her. She was almost there. But her relief was short-lived. Red and blue lights flashed in her rearview mirror, followed by the piercing wail of a siren. Emma frowned, slowing her car and pulling to the side of the road. She had been careful not to speed, knowing she couldn't afford any delays. There was no reason for her to be stopped. Two officers emerged from the patrol car. The older one approached her window, his expression hard, while the younger one hung back, his hand resting on his holstered weapon. "License and registration," the older officer barked. Emma handed over her documents. "Officer, I don't believe I violated any traffic laws," she said evenly. "Where are you headed in such a hurry?" he asked, his tone skeptical. "I'm Dr. Emma Carter, a heart surgeon," she explained. "I'm on my way to Springfield Hospital to operate on Emily Lawson. Sheriff Lawson called me personally. His daughter is in critical condition." The officers exchanged a glance. their skepticism palpable. The younger one scoffed, his voice dripping with disdain. "The sheriff called you? A black woman, driving a car with Hartford plates, claiming to be a surgeon in the middle of the night. That's rich." Emma stiffened. She had encountered prejudice before, but this was unlike anything she had faced. The arrogance, the disbelief, it was suffocating. "Call the sheriff if you don't believe me," she said firmly, though her pulse quickened with frustration. "But please, let me pass. Every second matters." "We'll decide what matters," the older officer retorted coldly. "For all we know, you're smuggling something. Step out of the vehicle." Emma's heart pounded. The weight of Emily's life pressed on her chest. "Officers, I don't have time for this," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "A 16-year-old girl's life is at stake." "Watch your tone," the younger officer snapped, his hand gripping his weapon tighter. Emma swallowed her anger, reaching for her phone. "I'm calling Sheriff Lawson. He'll confirm everything." The older officer hesitated before nodding. "Go ahead. Let's see if this story checks out." She dialed the sheriff's number, praying he would answer quickly. The phone barely rang twice before his voice came through, tense and urgent. "Dr. Carter, are you close?" "Sheriff," she said, her voice steady despite the storm in her chest. "I've been stopped by 2 of your officers. They don't believe me, and I'm running out of time." "Put one of them on the phone now," he ordered. Emma extended the phone to the older officer, her hand steady despite the tension. The officer hesitated before snatching it from her. "Hello." His tone was brusque, almost dismissive. Emma watched as his expression shifted. His shoulders stiffened, his eyes widening slightly. "Yes, sir. I understand." "No, sir. It won't happen again." When he handed the phone back, his earlier arrogance had been replaced by begrudging respect. "You can go," he said stiffly. Emma wasted no time, rolling up her window and starting her car. Relief mingled with lingering frustration as she sped off. The delay had cost her precious time Emily didn't have. Ahead, the hospital's lights shone like a beacon in the darkness, urging her forward. The fluorescent lights of Springfield General Hospital loomed closer as Dr. Emma Carter drove through the quiet streets, her knuckles white against the steering wheel. The encounter with the officers weighed on her mind, a bitter reminder of the obstacles she had faced throughout her career. Yet, there was no time to dwell on it now. Emily Lawson was waiting, her life hanging by a thread. Emma parked hastily in the emergency lot and grabbed her surgical bag. Inside, the hospital buzzed with activity, but one figure stood out near the entrance, a tall man in a sheriff's uniform, pacing anxiously, his face, lined with exhaustion, lit up when he saw her. "Dr. Carter," Sheriff Michael Lawson said, striding toward her. His voice carried equal parts relief and desperation. "Thank God you're here. She's in the OR prep room." Emma nodded, scanning the hallway for directions. "Let's move. I need to scrub in immediately." Michael led her through the maze of hallways, his steps hurried but steady. "She's a fighter," he said, almost to himself. "She's always been a fighter. But this, I don't know how much more she can take." His words pierced Emma's heart. Emily wasn't just a patient, she was someone's daughter, someone's whole world. The weight of responsibility settled even heavier on her shoulders as they reached the prep room. Emily lay on the gurney, her pale face almost unrecognizable from the photo Sheriff Lawson had sent earlier. Her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, her vital signs blinking weakly on the monitors. The medical team surrounding her looked grim, their expressions a silent acknowledgement of the stakes. Emma introduced herself as she donned her surgical gown and gloves, her movements quick and precise. "What's her status?" she asked the attending physician, a young man with tired eyes. "Ventricular fibrillation," he replied. "We've tried defibrillation twice. No sustained rhythm." Emma's chest tightened. The clock was ticking, and Emily's chances were slipping away with each second. "Prep the bypass machine," she ordered, her voice cutting through the tension. "We need to stabilize her and perform an emergency repair of the defect." The team sprang into action, following her lead. Emma's focus narrowed to the task ahead. The room buzzed with urgency, but she moved with the calm precision of someone who had faced life-and-death situations countless times before. As she worked, fragments of Emily's story played in her mind. A 16-year-old girl with her whole life ahead of her. A father who had pleaded for her life, willing to set aside his pride and authority. It wasn't just Emily's heart Emma was fighting for, it was her future, her dreams, and the love of a family that depended on her survival. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Emma's hands moved with practiced skill, her mind laser-focused on the intricate repair of Emily's heart. The team around her was silent, their collective concentration palpable. The only sounds were the steady beeps of monitors and the occasional directives from Emma. But as the procedure progressed, the grim reality began to set in. The delay on the road had caused more damage than anticipated. Emily's heart struggled to sustain even the artificial support provided by the bypass machine. "Come on, Emily," Emma murmured under her breath, her voice barely audible beneath her surgical mask. "Stay with me." Suddenly, the monitor emitted a shrill, continuous tone. Emma's heart sank as she looked at the flat line on the screen. "No, no, no," she muttered, her voice rising. "Start compressions. Administer another dose of epinephrine. Charge the paddles to 200. The team moved swiftly, their actions synchronized. Emma's commands came like a lifeline, but the minutes ticked by with no response. Finally, the attending physician placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Dr. Carter," he said softly, his voice heavy with resignation. Emma froze, her gaze fixed on Emily's still form. The weight of every second she had lost on the road came crashing down. Slowly, she stepped back, her hands trembling. I need to call it," she said, her voice breaking. She glanced at the clock. Time of death, 4:07 a.m. She removed her gloves and gown, her steps heavy as she walked toward the waiting room. Sheriff Lawson stood as soon as he saw her, his expression a fragile mix of hope and dread. Emma swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "She's gone," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry." Michael staggered backward, his face crumpling with grief. For a moment, he said nothing, burying his face in his hands. When he finally looked up, his sorrow had hardened into something else, anger. "What happened?" he demanded, his voice shaking. "You should have been here in time." Emma met his eyes, her own brimming with unshed tears. "I was stopped by 2 of your officers on the highway," she explained, her tone steady despite the storm inside her. "They delayed me for nearly 20 minutes. Michael's face darkened, his grief boiling over into fury. "They did what?" She nodded, her voice unwavering. "I can't undo what's happened, but I can help you hold them accountable. I have a camera in my car that recorded the entire encounter." Sheriff Lawson clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. "This won't go unanswered," he said, his voice low and resolute. As he stormed out of the waiting room, Emma stood alone, the weight of the night pressing down on her. Emily's loss was irreparable, and the pain of what could have been was a wound that would linger for a lifetime. The days following Emily's death were a blur of grief, anger, and endless questioning. Emma found herself replaying that night over and over in her mind. Could she have done something differently? Could she have pushed harder to get through the officers? Could she have saved Emily if she had only arrived minutes earlier? The weight of those thoughts was heavy on her heart. But the reality was undeniable. Emily Lawson was gone. A 16-year-old girl with her entire life ahead of her, gone because of a cruel twist of fate. A delay on a lonely highway, and the prejudice of 2 officers who should have known better. The funeral was held on a crisp autumn afternoon. The small chapel in Springfield was filled to capacity, with Sheriff Michael Lawson standing at the front. His shoulders stooped with the weight of his grief. Emma stood in the back, her heart aching as she watched his family, mourning the loss of their beloved Emily. Sheriff Lawson had asked her to speak, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. What words could possibly comfort a father who had lost his child? How could she stand before a grieving family and offer them solace when she, too, felt as though she had failed them? Instead, Emma watched quietly as the service unfolded. There were no grand speeches or dramatic outbursts, only the soft, mournful sound of a community coming together to say goodbye. Michael, standing at the pulpit, spoke of Emily's bright future, of her kindness, her laughter, her dreams. He spoke of the day she had been born and how he had promised her mother that he would always protect her. And now, he was left with nothing but a promise he could never keep. Emma felt the sharp sting of her own tears, but she wiped them away before anyone could see. It was not her place to mourn with them, she thought. She had done what she could. But the truth remained, Emily was gone, and there was nothing anyone could do to bring her back. But Sheriff Lawson wasn't ready to let the matter go. He had been unrelenting in his pursuit of justice for his daughter, and now he turned his focus to the two officers who had stopped Emma on the highway. Their actions, the humiliation they had caused her, and the delay in getting to Emily had become an issue that couldn't be ignored. Michael knew that if this kind of behavior went unchallenged, it would set a dangerous precedent for the entire department. The investigation into the officers' conduct was swift and thorough. Witnesses were interviewed. The dashcam footage from Emma's car was reviewed, and both officers were placed on administrative leave. Michael had made it clear from the beginning that he would not rest until those responsible were held accountable. For Emma, the investigation was both a blessing and a curse. She didn't want the attention, didn't want to relive the trauma of that night. But at the same time, she understood the importance of what was happening. If nothing else, it was a chance to ensure that something like this never happened again. The officers' hearings were held in the weeks following Emily's funeral. Emma attended each one, her presence a silent reminder of what had been lost because of their actions. The younger officer, Officer Harris, had been dismissive from the start, his arrogance on full display as he insisted that he had acted in accordance with procedure. The older officer, Officer Thompson, was more reserved, but it was clear that his actions had been equally irresponsible. When Michael took the stand to testify, his voice was calm but resolute. "I don't care about your excuses," he said, his words cutting through the room. "My daughter is dead, and I will make sure you pay for your part in it. You failed me, and you failed my family." The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the air. Michael's resolve was unshakable, and Emma couldn't help but feel a deep respect for the man who had, in his grief, become an unwavering force of justice. The proceedings lasted for hours, with both officers making feeble attempts to justify their actions. But the evidence was overwhelming. Officer Thompson was placed on suspension pending further investigation, and Officer Harris was fired for insubordination and racial profiling. For Michael, it was a small measure of justice. It would never bring Emily back, but it was a step toward accountability, a step toward ensuring that no one else would have to suffer because of the actions of those in power. In the weeks that followed, Springfield began to change. The public outrage sparked by Emily's death and the officers' misconduct led to a wider conversation about policing and racial discrimination. Michael worked tirelessly to push for reform within the department, advocating for bias training, increased transparency, and civilian oversight. Emma, too, found herself becoming involved in the cause. The loss of Emily had left an indelible mark on her, but it also lit a fire within her, a fire that pushed her to speak out for justice, to fight for the fair treatment of all people, and to ensure that healthcare would be accessible to those in need, regardless of their race or background. Through it all, Emma and Michael found an unexpected bond, the shared grief of losing someone they loved, The shared determination to bring justice to Emily's name, it forged a connection between them that neither of them had anticipated. And though their paths had crossed under the darkest of circumstances, they found solace in one another's resolve. But the road ahead was not easy. The pain of losing Emily would never fully fade. And the work of creating change was far from over. Yet, Emma knew one thing for certain: Emily's legacy would not be forgotten. The fight for justice, for fairness, for equity, those were the lessons that had come from her death. And they would continue to shape the future. For the first time in a long while, Emma felt a sense of purpose that went beyond the operating table. She was fighting for something greater than herself. And she knew that, together with Michael, they would see it through. As time passed, both Emma and Michael continued their work. Their shared mission to honor Emily's memory by pushing for change. The fight for justice was ongoing. But they found solace in knowing that Emily's story had sparked a movement that would lead to reforms in policing and healthcare, ensuring that future lives wouldn't be lost in the same way. While their grief would never fully fade, Emma and Michael drew strength from the legacy they were creating together. They had turned their pain into purpose, and in doing so, had found healing. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to subscribe to our channel to follow more inspiring life stories. Your support helps us bring more real-life experiences to light, reminding us all of the power of empathy, justice, and the strength of the human spirit. Stay tuned for more.